Fix this engine, boy, and I'll marry you right here in front of God and everybody." Victoria Sterling Hayes's voice cut through the boardroom like broken glass, her diamond bracelet catching the harsh fluorescent lights as she gestured toward the silent machine. Laughter rippled through the crowd of executives and BMW representatives, but it was the cruel kind that left scars. Jackson Baptiste stood frozen in the doorway, maintenance cart in his calloused hands, tool belt heavy around his waist. 200 pairs of eyes bore into him like searchlights, waiting for the show to begin. The live stream counter in the corner read 50,000 viewers and climbing. "When you fail," Victoria continued, her red stilettos clicking against marble as she circled him like a predator, "and you will fail, security escorts you out permanently. No severance, no references. Nothing." The room fell silent except for the whisper of air conditioning and the distant hum of machinery that had been dead for 12 weeks. What Victoria Sterling Hayes didn't know about Jackson Baptiste would destroy everything she thought she understood about power, respect, and the true meaning of expertise. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Magnolia Motors had risen from the muddy banks of the Mississippi River like a testament to Southern industrial pride. The sprawling automotive plant stretched across 40 acres of reclaimed wetland, its brick smokestacks reaching toward heaven like cathedral spires. For 3 generations, the Sterling family had built engines here, employing 800 families from the 9th Ward to Metairie. Jackson Baptiste had walked these floors for 20 years, invisible as morning mist. At 45, he moved through the facility with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that survival meant staying unnoticed. His grandfather, Eli, had taught him that lesson during those sweltering New Orleans summers when Jackson was just a boy with calloused palms and dreams bigger than the French Quarter. "Engines got souls, boy," Eli would whisper as they worked side by side in the old garage on Magazine Street. "You listen real careful. They'll tell you everything you need to know. Don't matter what color you are or how much schooling you got. Metal don't lie, and neither do pistons." Those words had carried Jackson through Hurricane Katrina, through losing his parents in the storm, through watching his Tulane engineering scholarship slip away like debris in the floodwaters. 20 years of mopping floors and emptying trash cans while his mind burned with solutions nobody wanted to hear from a maintenance worker. Victoria Sterling Hayes commanded her empire from the executive floor, her corner office overlooking the river where her great-grandfather had first dreamed of building something lasting. At 38, she carried the weight of legacy like a crown of thorns. The company was hemorrhaging money, the board questioning her leadership, and the $50 million BMW contract represented her last chance to prove she was worthy of the Sterling name. Her father's dying words still echoed in her mind. "You'll never be strong enough to run this company, Victoria. Not like your brothers would have been." The cancer had taken him before she could prove him wrong, leaving behind doubts that metastasized in her soul. The revolutionary hybrid engine sat silent on the boardroom table, 12 weeks of failure, mocking every engineer, every consultant, every expert who had tried and failed to bring it to life. Tomorrow's BMW delegation would either crown Magnolia Motors as their American partner or drive the final nail into a century-old coffin. Jackson pushed his maintenance cart past the boardroom windows each night, studying blueprints left scattered on conference tables, listening to the engine's silence like a doctor checking a patient's pulse. He knew what was wrong, had known for weeks, but who would listen to a janitor? The crisis erupted on a humid Thursday morning when the BMW delegation's private jet touched down at Louis Armstrong International Airport. Dr. Heinrich Weber stepped onto the tarmac with the bearing of a man who had built automotive empires across 3 continents. Behind him, 5 German engineers emerged carrying briefcases full of contracts and expectations that could transform Magnolia Motors into a global powerhouse overnight. Victoria Sterling Hayes stood in the executive boardroom, her hands trembling as she reviewed the financial reports one final time. The numbers painted a picture of corporate death in neat columns and percentages. 12 weeks without a functioning prototype had drained the company's reserves faster than a punctured fuel tank. The employee pension fund had been quietly borrowed to keep the lights on, a decision that would either save 800 families or destroy them entirely. Stock prices had plummeted 60% since the engine failure began. Local news crews waited outside the gates like vultures, drawn by rumors of layoffs and bankruptcy. The mayor's office had called twice this morning, concerned about the ripple effect through New Orleans' economy. Everything the Sterling family had built over 3 generations balanced on the edge of a knife. Jackson Baptiste pushed his maintenance cart through the engineering wing, invisible as always to the MIT graduates hunched over diagnostic computers. He paused outside Conference Room B, where the broken engine sat like a metallic gravestone on the polished mahogany table. 12 weeks of failure had turned the room into a monument to human arrogance. "The frequency modulation is completely out of sync," Dr. Sarah Chen muttered, rubbing her temples as she stared at readouts that made no sense. "We've tried everything: software patches, hardware replacements, complete system rebuilds." Marcus Rodriguez, the team leader with a Harvard MBA and a crushing student debt load, slammed his laptop shut in frustration. "Maybe we should consider that this entire project was a mistake. Cut our losses before BMW realizes we're incompetent." Jackson's weathered hands tightened on his cart handle. He'd listened to this same conversation every night for weeks, watching brilliant minds chase their own tails while the solution sat there plain as Sunday morning. The engine wasn't broken. It was crying out for someone who understood its language. The all-hands meeting was called for 10 o'clock sharp. 800 employees packed into the main assembly hall, their faces reflecting various stages of fear and resignation. Jackson stood in the back near the emergency exits, as he had for every company gathering in 20 years. Invisible, forgotten, safe. Victoria took the podium with the composure of someone walking to the electric chair. "Ladies and gentlemen, we face our greatest challenge. Our prototype engine remains non-operational despite the best efforts of our engineering teams." She paused, letting the weight of impending doom settle over the crowd like Spanish moss. "The BMW delegation arrives in 2 hours. If we cannot demonstrate a functioning engine, the contract will be terminated. 800 jobs hang in the balance." The silence that followed was suffocating. Jackson could hear the whisper of air conditioning, the distant rumble of traffic on the interstate, the collective held breath of families who depended on this paycheck to buy groceries and pay mortgages. That's when Jackson made his mistake. The words escaped before wisdom could catch them. "Ma'am, I believe I know what's wrong with the engine." 800 heads turned like sunflowers following light. The German delegation, seated in the front row, leaned forward with sudden interest. Dr. Weber's steel-gray eyes fixed on Jackson with the intensity of someone who had spent 40 years separating expertise from empty boasting. Victoria's face transformed through a spectrum of emotions, surprise melting into rage, then crystallizing into something far more dangerous: opportunity. Here was her chance to deflect blame, to demonstrate decisive leadership, to provide the BMW executives with entertainment while destroying someone who dared challenge her authority. A cruel smile spread across her lips as the perfect plan materialized. "Well, well, Our maintenance consultant has an opinion about advanced automotive engineering. The word maintenance dripped with venom that made several employees cringe visibly. She stepped away from the podium, her Louboutin heels clicking against polished concrete like a countdown timer. Jackson Baptiste, isn't it? The man who empties our trash and mops our floors thinks he understands what MIT graduates couldn't solve in 12 weeks. Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. Employees exchanged uncomfortable glances, caught between horror and fascination. This was corporate blood sport, and everyone sensed what was coming. Dr. Weber pulled out his leather notebook, uncapping an expensive fountain pen. In 4 decades of automotive engineering, he'd witnessed breakthrough solutions emerge from the most unexpected sources. His mentor at Stuttgart had taught him never to dismiss insights based on their packaging. "Since you're so confident," Victoria continued, her voice rising with theatrical flair, "here's your chance to prove it. Fix our $50 million engine that has stumped our best minds for 12 weeks. She gestured toward the German delegation like a game show host presenting prizes. "Do it in front of everyone. Our board, our investors, our entire workforce." The trap was set, baited with public humiliation and professional destruction. Jackson Baptiste stood at the crossroads of destiny, holding a maintenance cart and carrying 20 years of hidden genius. The auditorium fell into a silence so complete that the building's ventilation system sounded like rushing wind. Victoria Sterling Hayes stood frozen at the podium, her manicured fingers gripping the microphone stand until her knuckles turned white. She hadn't expected this moment. A maintenance worker challenging her authority in front of investors who could make or break her family's century-old legacy. Dr. Heinrich Weber leaned forward in his front row seat, his steel-gray eyes fixed on Jackson with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. Beside him, the other BMW executives whispered in rapid German, their harsh consonants cutting through the tension like scattered glass. Weber had spent 40 years in automotive engineering, and something in Jackson's quiet confidence reminded him of the breakthrough moments that separated true innovation from mere technical competence. Victoria's mind raced through possibilities. She could dismiss Jackson's comment, maintain her authority, and proceed with damage control. But Klaus Mueller's expression stopped her. The German industrialist was studying Jackson with the same focus he reserved for promising prototypes. This wasn't the time for quick dismissals. This was opportunity wrapped in crisis. A cruel smile spread across Victoria's lips as a better idea crystallized. Why simply silence him when she could destroy him publicly? Make an example that would terrify every employee into absolute compliance while entertaining her German guests with American corporate theater. The live stream had already begun, company cameras capturing every moment for posterity and social media engagement. "Here are the stakes, Jackson." Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper that the microphone caught and amplified throughout the auditorium. "You have exactly 3 hours to diagnose and repair what our MIT-trained engineers couldn't fix in 12 weeks. 3 hours to prove that a maintenance worker with a community college background understands advanced automotive engineering better than Harvard graduates." She gestured toward the German delegation like a ringmaster presenting her main attraction. "These gentlemen represent $50 million in contracts and the future of 800 families. They came to see American innovation at work. Let's give them a show they'll never forget." The auditorium buzzed with shocked murmurs. Employees pulled out smartphones, already composing texts and social media posts about the unfolding drama. This was the kind of corporate spectacle that would be discussed in New Orleans bars for months, the moment when workplace hierarchy met its ultimate test. Victoria's voice rose with theatrical flair. "If you succeed, which we both know you won't, I'll personally promote you to Chief Engineering Consultant with a salary that matches your inflated confidence. Hell, I'll marry you right here in front of God and everybody just like I promised." The crowd's nervous laughter carried an edge of discomfort. Marriage proposals as public humiliation crossed lines that made even the most cynical executives squirm. But Victoria was beyond caring about professional boundaries. Desperation had stripped away her corporate polish, revealing something raw and dangerous underneath. "But when you fail," she continued, her smile sharp enough to draw blood, "you're not just fired. You're banned from this building permanently. Security will escort you out, and I'll personally ensure that every automotive company from here to Detroit knows about your spectacular failure." Two security guards materialized at the auditorium's side doors like summoned demons. Their presence wasn't subtle. This was intimidation theater designed to terrify anyone else who might consider challenging authority. The live stream counter had climbed to 15,000 viewers, with comments flooding in from employees, families, and friends who'd been alerted to the corporate drama unfolding in real time. Dr. Weber stood up suddenly, his movement commanding attention throughout the room. At 62, Heinrich Weber commanded respect that transcended corporate hierarchies. His work at BMW had revolutionized diesel efficiency. His consulting firm counted every major European manufacturer as clients. When he spoke, engineers listened with the reverence usually reserved for prophets. "I will serve as technical witness," he announced, his accented English carrying the authority of German precision. "This challenge requires neutral oversight to ensure fairness and accuracy." His piercing gaze swept between Victoria and Jackson. "If we are to evaluate American problem-solving methods, we must do so with scientific rigor." Victoria's smile flickered momentarily. She hadn't anticipated this development. Weber's involvement legitimized the challenge, transforming it from corporate humiliation into a formal, technical evaluation. The German industrialist's reputation for fairness was legendary. He would neither favor nor condemn based on appearance or position. Klaus Müller nodded approvingly from his seat. "Excellent, Herr Baptiste, you have our complete attention. We are curious to see innovative approaches to complex problems." His English was precise, carrying the weight of industrial authority that had built Germany's automotive reputation from the ashes of 2 world wars. The auditorium erupted in whispered conversations as the magnitude of the moment settled into collective consciousness. This wasn't just about one man's career or one woman's authority. It was about the fundamental question of where expertise truly resided. Could practical experience triumph over academic credentials? Could quiet competence defeat loud arrogance? Victoria realized she'd lost control of the narrative, but retreat was impossible. The cameras were rolling, the Germans were watching, and her company's future hung in the balance. "Fine," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Dr. Weber can witness your inevitable failure, but I'm adding one more condition." She gestured toward the cameras that Tech Vanguard used for employee communications. "We're live streaming this entire challenge on our company's social media accounts. LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Let the automotive world see what happens when unqualified people attempt jobs beyond their capabilities." Marketing assistants scrambled to set up professional lighting and camera angles. Social media managers began crafting hashtags. Hashtag Magnolia Motors Challenge / Engineering Test, Innovation at Work. Within minutes, the company's accounts would be broadcasting live footage to thousands of followers across the industrial South. Jackson Baptiste stood motionless throughout this corporate circus, his maintenance cart still beside him like a faithful companion. His calloused hands remained steady despite the earthquake of attention focused on his every breath. 20 years of invisibility had prepared him for this moment, not through specific training, but through a lifetime of understanding that engines responded to competence regardless of credentials. The challenge was officially accepted. 3 hours to prove or destroy a lifetime of hidden expertise. The broken engine waited in the boardroom like a mechanical judge, its silent testimony about to determine not just one man's destiny, but the fate of a company, its workers, and the very definition of what it meant to be qualified in modern America. As the crowd began moving toward the executive floor, phones recording every step of this unprecedented corporate drama, Jackson whispered a prayer his grandmother had taught him, "Lord, let still waters run deep." The real test was about to begin. The executive boardroom transformed into an amphitheater of judgment as 300 employees pressed against the glass walls, their faces creating a mosaic of anticipation, doubt, and barely concealed excitement. The German delegation arranged themselves in executive leather chairs like a tribunal of industrial gods, Klaus Muller checking his platinum Rolex with Germanic precision, while Dr. Weber positioned himself beside the silent engine with the authority of someone who had witnessed countless moments of engineering truth. Jackson Baptiste approached the massive conference table, where the hybrid engine dominated the space like a technological altar. Chrome and steel components caught the LED lighting, creating shadows that seemed to pulse with mechanical possibility. Diagnostic equipment surrounded the machine, laptops displaying endless error codes, oscilloscopes tracing electromagnetic signatures, temperature sensors monitoring thermal patterns that had confounded 12 weeks of expert analysis. Victoria Sterling Hayes stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, her silhouette framed against the New Orleans skyline, where barges moved slowly down the Mississippi River like mechanical prayers. Her smartphone live-streamed the scene to the company's social media accounts, viewer numbers climbing rapidly as word spread through automotive industry networks. The comments section filled with predictions, mostly favoring spectacular failure from the maintenance worker who dared challenge corporate hierarchy. The first revelation came not from Jackson's hands, but from his past. As he rolled up his sleeves, exposing forearms marked by years of honest labor, Dr. Weber's eyes widened with sudden recognition. The German engineer stepped closer, studying Jackson's face with the intensity of someone piecing together a long-forgotten puzzle. "Mein Gott," Weber whispered, his accented English barely audible above the room's ventilation system. "Jackson Baptiste, Tulane University, class of 2005. You were my most promising student before—" He stopped, understanding flooding his features like sunrise over the bayou. The boardroom fell silent as Weber's words registered. Jackson's hidden past began to crack open like an oyster revealing its pearl. 20 years of carefully maintained invisibility started crumbling as the truth demanded its moment in the light. "Hurricane Katrina," Jackson said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of suppressed dreams. "Lost everything in the storm. Parents, home, scholarship. Had to choose between my education and my grandmother's survival. Wasn't much of a choice, really." "Dr." Weber nodded with the understanding of someone who had seen brilliant minds sacrificed to circumstances beyond their control. "You were working on harmonic resonance theory. Your thesis proposal on engine frequency optimization was extraordinary, ahead of its time by years." Victoria's confident expression flickered as she realized her victim possessed credentials that rivaled her own engineering team. The live-stream comments exploded with shock and outrage as viewers discovered the company had been wasting a PhD-level mind on janitorial duties for 2 decades. Jackson's hands moved over the engine with the tenderness of a doctor examining a patient. His weathered fingers traced cooling lines and mounting brackets with intimate familiarity, reading the machine's story through touch alone. "This beauty was manufactured in Munich," he said, his voice taking on the cadence of someone finally allowed to speak his native language. "Built to German tolerances, which are tighter than American standards by several hundredths of an inch." He pointed to specific components while the German delegation leaned forward with growing interest. "The problem isn't in the software or the hardware individually, it's in the conversation between them. This engine is trying to sing in perfect pitch, but the computer is asking it to harmonize in a slightly different key. The technical explanation that followed was poetry disguised as engineering. Jackson explained how the German-manufactured components operated at precise tolerances that the American-programmed software didn't expect. The engine would run perfectly for 18 minutes, exactly the time it took for the harmonic mismatch to reach critical resonance, then shut down to protect itself from damage. 18 minutes, Marcus Rodriguez muttered from the MIT engineering team, his Harvard MBA suddenly feeling like expensive wallpaper. That's exactly when it fails every time. But how did you know without running diagnostics? Jackson's smile carried the weight of his grandfather's wisdom. Because I listen to what the engine is trying to tell me. Every machine has its own voice, its own heartbeat. You just have to know how to hear it. The second revelation cut deeper into the company's soul. As Jackson worked, Security Chief Tommy Williams approached Dr. Weber with information that would change everything. Williams was a 40-year veteran of the plant, a former Ford mechanic who had watched generations of workers come and go. "Doc," Williams said quietly, "I knew this boy's grandfather. Eli Baptiste was the finest engine mechanic this side of Detroit. Could diagnose problems just by listening to the sound. Taught young Jackson everything he knew before the cancer took him." Williams pulled out his smartphone, scrolling through old photographs until he found what he was looking for. "This here's from 1995. Plant Christmas party." He showed Weber a faded image of a younger Jackson, probably 16, standing beside an elderly black man whose hands bore the same calluses that marked his grandson's palms. "That's Eli Baptiste," Williams continued. "He could resurrect any engine, no matter how dead it seemed. White folks going to test you twice as hard, he used to tell Jackson, going to assume you're half as smart. But engines don't lie, boy. When you fix something they couldn't, suddenly your color doesn't matter so much." Dr. Weber studied the photograph with growing amazement. In 40 years of automotive engineering, he had learned to recognize the rare individuals who possessed an almost mystical understanding of mechanical systems. Eli Baptiste's legacy lived on in his grandson's intuitive grasp of engine psychology. The third revelation emerged as Jackson began his actual repair work. Instead of reaching for complex diagnostic equipment or expensive replacement parts, he walked to a storage cabinet and selected what appeared to be a simple metal disc, roughly the size of a silver dollar, with carefully calculated perforations. "A harmonic dampener," he explained, holding the component up for everyone to see. "Costs about $80. Instead of reprogramming the software to match German tolerances or remanufacturing components to American specifications, we add this resonance buffer to help them communicate effectively." Victoria's face went pale as the implications hit her. "You're suggesting an $80 part can solve a problem that's cost us 12 weeks and millions in consulting fees?" Jackson's response carried the quiet dignity of someone who had spent 20 years watching incompetence disguised as expertise. "Sometimes the most elegant engineering solutions are the simplest ones, ma'am. This engine isn't broken. It just needs someone to help it find its natural rhythm." The installation process took 47 minutes. Jackson worked with movements that spoke of decades of mechanical experience, his hands moving with the confident precision of someone who had rebuilt countless engines in midnight workshops and weekend garages. Every gesture carried the muscle memory of a master craftsman, inherited wisdom passed down through generations of men who understood that machines had souls. Dr. Weber documented every step with professional fascination, his fountain pen scratching across notebook pages as he recorded techniques that weren't taught in any university. This was automotive archaeology, the preservation of knowledge that existed in the spaces between textbook theories and real-world application. As Jackson made the final connections, the boardroom atmosphere shifted like a weather front moving across the Gulf Coast. The German delegation exchanged meaningful glances, their expressions revealing calculations that extended far beyond technical assessments. Klaus Muller's assistant typed urgent notes on her tablet, documenting performance metrics that could revolutionize their American partnership strategy. The moment of truth approached like a slow-moving storm. Jackson stepped back from the engine, his work complete, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. 20 years of hidden expertise had led to this single moment when his grandfather's wisdom would either triumph or be dismissed forever. "Ready for testing," Jackson announced, his voice carrying across the boardroom with quiet confidence. The engine sat before them like a sleeping giant, its chrome surfaces reflecting the faces of everyone who had doubted its resurrection was possible. Dr. Weber positioned himself at the diagnostic equipment, his experienced eyes ready to interpret every data stream and measurement. And the German investors leaned forward with collective anticipation, their future partnership hanging on the next few minutes. Victoria's smartphone captured every moment for the thousands of online viewers who had become invested in this unlikely engineering drama. The comments section scrolled too rapidly to read individual messages, but the emotional energy was palpable, a digital crowd holding its breath for David's confrontation with Goliath. Jackson's hand moved toward the ignition key, carrying with it 2 decades of suppressed dreams, his grandfather's legacy, and the hopes of 800 families whose futures depended on the success of this $50 million gamble. The engine held its mechanical breath, ready to reveal whether genius truly resided in unexpected places or if corporate hierarchy represented the natural order of technological progress. The ignition key turned with a metallic click that echoed through the silent boardroom like a gunshot. 300 people held their breath as the engine awakened, its initial rumble filling the space with mechanical thunder that seemed to shake the building's steel foundations. But something was different this time, immediately, unmistakably different. The harsh, irregular knocking that had plagued the engine for 12 weeks was gone. In its place emerged a smooth, deep purring that made Dr. Weber's eyes widen with recognition. This was what automotive perfection sounded like. 8 cylinders firing in perfect synchronization, each combustion chamber contributing to a harmony that resonated through the boardroom like a mechanical symphony. Jackson stood beside the engine, his weathered hand resting lightly on the vibrating surface. Where once he had felt the desperate struggle of components fighting against each other, now he sensed the calm confidence of machinery operating within its natural rhythm. The harmonic dampener had worked exactly as his grandfather's wisdom had predicted, bridging the gap between German precision and American expectations. The diagnostic screens erupted with green indicators for the first time in 84 days. Temperature readings stabilized in optimal ranges, while pressure sensors registered perfect compression across all cylinders. The error messages that had haunted MIT engineers for 3 months vanished, replaced by steady streams of operational data that made the assembled crowd gasp in collective amazement. "Mein Gott," Klaus Muller whispered, his German composure cracking as he stared at readings that his own Munich engineers had only dreamed of achieving. The engine was operating at 98.7% efficiency, nearly 4 percentage points higher than theoretical maximum performance specifications. Dr. Weber moved between diagnostic stations like a conductor reading sheet music, his trained eyes absorbing data that told an incredible story of mechanical resurrection. "Oil pressure steady at optimal levels," he announced to the breathless crowd. "Engine temperature holding at 187 degrees Fahrenheit. harmonic frequency locked at precisely 3,400 RPM with zero deviation. He looked up at Jackson with something approaching reverence, his voice carrying the weight of 4 decades in automotive engineering. In all my years designing engines for BMW, Mercedes, and Volkswagen, I have never witnessed diagnostic readings this clean. Your grandfather would be immensely proud. Victoria Sterling Hayes stood frozen near the windows, her face pale as the magnitude of Jackson's triumph began to sink into her consciousness. The live stream counter had climbed to over 75,000 viewers, with comments flooding in from automotive engineers worldwide who were witnessing something they had never expected to see, a maintenance worker achieving what teams of credentialed experts had failed to accomplish. The real test came when she demanded full operational validation. "Fine," Victoria said, her voice tight with barely controlled desperation. "It's running smoothly now. But can it actually power our prototype vehicles under real-world conditions?" Through the boardroom's floor-to-ceiling windows, employees could see Magnolia Motors' prototype delivery truck parked in the courtyard below. The gleaming white vehicle had sat motionless for 12 weeks, its advanced navigation systems and electric drive motors useless without a functioning power source. The truck represented millions of dollars in development costs and the hopes of 800 families whose futures depended on the BMW partnership. Jackson nodded toward the vehicle with quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from his very core. "Let's see what she can do, ma'am. This engine's been waiting to show her true potential." The power flowed through transmission systems and electrical generators with the smoothness of Mississippi River water finding its natural course. Dashboard lights illuminated in sequence as the autonomous vehicle's brain came online for the first time in 3 months. GPS systems activated with electronic chirps while radar sensors began their scanning patterns. Camera arrays focused with mechanical precision, their lenses adjusting to capture every detail of the surrounding environment. The crowd pressed against the windows as the truck's headlights brightened, its electrical systems drawing power from the perfectly synchronized engine. Slowly, almost ceremonially, the vehicle began to move with the grace of a mechanical ballet dancer, finding her rhythm after a long, forced intermission. The prototype backed out of its parking space with computer-controlled precision, navigated around landscaping obstacles with inches to spare, and executed a flawless parallel parking maneuver that drew spontaneous applause from the watching employees. For 43 minutes, the engine ran without a single irregularity, its harmonic frequency never wavering from the optimal range that Jackson had somehow intuited through pure mechanical empathy. The dreaded 18-minute shutdown point passed without incident. 20 minutes beyond that milestone, the systems continued operating with German engineering precision, powered by American innovation and guided by Detroit mechanical wisdom that had been passed down through generations of working-class craftsmen who understood that machines possessed souls worth listening to. Klaus Müller's assistant typed furiously on her tablet, documenting performance metrics that exceeded every specification in their original investment proposal. The other German investors huddled in rapid conversation, their expressions shifting from skepticism to amazement to barely contained excitement about partnership possibilities that suddenly seemed limitless. Victoria's smartphone had attracted over 100,000 viewers to the live stream, transforming what she had intended as public humiliation into a viral celebration of hidden genius overcoming corporate arrogance. The comments section scrolled too rapidly to read individual messages, but the emotional energy was unmistakable. People were witnessing something that restored their faith in meritocracy and justice. Dr. Weber finally raised his hand for silence, his authoritative gesture commanding immediate attention throughout the boardroom. "Shut down the engine," he commanded with Germanic finality. "We have witnessed sufficient evidence of complete operational success." The engine settled into silence with the satisfied sigh of machinery that had finally found its true purpose. The diagnostic screens maintained their green glow for several seconds before fading to standby mode, their peaceful darkness marking the end of 12 weeks of corporate nightmare. The prototype truck returned to its parking space and powered down its systems with electronic contentment, its mission accomplished. The boardroom remained silent for long moments as the magnitude of what had just occurred settled into collective consciousness. 12 weeks of failure, millions of dollars in consulting fees, and the reputations of multiple engineering teams had been rendered obsolete in less than 3 hours by someone whose official job description included emptying waste baskets and mopping floors. Jackson Baptiste stood quietly beside his maintenance cart, his calloused hands steady despite having just performed what amounted to corporate miracles. 20 years of invisibility had prepared him for this moment, not through specific training in public speaking or corporate politics, but through a lifetime of understanding that competence spoke louder than credentials when the stakes were measured in mechanical truth. Dr. Weber approached Jackson with formal respect, extending his hand in a gesture that carried the weight of German engineering tradition. "That was extraordinary diagnostic intuition," he said, his accent thickening with emotion. "Where others heard only silence, you heard mechanical poetry. Your solution was elegant, cost-effective, and brilliant in its simplicity." Klaus Muller rose from his executive chair, his handshake firm with Teutonic approval. "Herr Baptiste, your methodology has impressed our entire delegation beyond measure. This represents the innovative thinking that builds lasting industrial partnerships between nations." The moment of vindication had arrived, but Jackson's triumph was about to face its greatest test. Victoria Sterling Hayes had orchestrated this challenge expecting easy victory and public entertainment at his expense. Now, with her company's future secured and her authority undermined by a maintenance worker's competence, she faced a choice that would define her character for the rest of her corporate career. The live stream continued broadcasting to a global audience that had grown invested in this David versus Goliath story. What happened next would determine whether corporate America could acknowledge merit regardless of its packaging, or whether prejudice would find new ways to deny obvious truth. The boardroom's atmosphere shifted like a Gulf Coast storm front as Victoria Sterling Hayes processed the magnitude of Jackson's triumph. What had begun as her carefully orchestrated public humiliation theater had transformed into her own professional reckoning, broadcast live to over 100,000 viewers who were witnessing corporate karma in real time. Her hands trembled as she clutched her smartphone, the device that had been intended to capture Jackson's failure now documenting her own downfall. The comments section exploded with celebrations of his success and harsh criticism of her leadership methods. Hashtags like #Justice4, Jackson and #CEO Karma began trending across social media platforms as the story spread beyond automotive circles into mainstream consciousness. "Well?" Dr. Weber's voice cut through the silence with Germanic precision. "The engine operates flawlessly. The challenge has been completed successfully. What is your response, Ms. Sterling Hayes?" Victoria's mind reeled as she searched for escape routes that didn't exist. The BMW delegation sat watching her with expressions that ranged from disappointment to barely concealed disgust. Klaus Müller's assistant continued typing notes that would undoubtedly influence millions of dollars in future investment decisions. The German industrialists had come to evaluate American innovation and instead witnessed American prejudice exposed in its ugliest form. This was just lucky guesswork," Victoria stammered, her voice lacking the confident authority that had intimidated employees for years. "Anyone can get lucky once. We need more comprehensive testing before—" Enough! Klaus Mueller's voice carried the weight of industrial authority that had rebuilt Germany from wartime ashes. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and final. We have witnessed sufficient evidence of both technical competence and character. The question now is whether Magnolia Motors possesses the leadership wisdom to recognize and properly utilize such talent. Dr. Weber closed his leather notebook with a sound like a judge's gavel. In 40 years of automotive engineering, I have learned that breakthrough solutions often emerge from unexpected sources. Today, we have witnessed mechanical intuition that surpasses anything taught in universities. The question is not whether Mr. Baptiste deserves recognition, it is whether this company deserves to keep him. The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She had orchestrated this challenge to demonstrate decisive leadership and provide entertainment for her German guests. Instead, she had revealed systematic incompetence that had wasted a PhD-level mind on janitorial duties while expensive consultants failed to achieve basic operational objectives. Board member Patricia Brooks, who had remained silent during the technical demonstration, now spoke with the authority of someone holding significant stock options and fiduciary responsibilities. This incident requires immediate investigation by our governance committee. We need to understand how qualified personnel were systematically underutilized while the company hemorrhaged money on failed solutions. The investigation wouldn't require extensive effort. Victoria's email history provided damning evidence of discriminatory practices that would make corporate lawyers cringe. Messages referring to Jackson as the janitor, despite his official consultant title. Deliberate scheduling of his maintenance duties during important investor meetings to minimize his visibility. Documented discussions about his inevitable termination as cost-cutting theater, complete with derogatory comments about his intelligence and capabilities. Human Resources Director Margaret Walsh, who had participated in some of the cruel email exchanges, found herself summoned to emergency meetings about hostile workplace environment policies. The viral video had become legal evidence, and employment attorneys were already discussing potential discrimination lawsuits that could bankrupt the company even faster than engineering failures. Victoria's authority crumbled like sugar in rain as board members huddled in urgent conversations. The BMW delegation prepared to return to their hotel, their disappointment in American corporate culture evident in every gesture. Klaus Mueller approached Jackson directly, bypassing Victoria entirely in a gesture that spoke volumes about shifting power dynamics. Herr Baptiste, Mueller said with formal respect, would you consider consulting opportunities with BMW's Munich engineering division? Your diagnostic methodologies could revolutionize our approach to hybrid engine development. The offer hung in the boardroom air like incense, carrying implications that made Victoria's stomach clench with desperation. Losing Jackson to a German competitor would complete her humiliation while depriving Magnolia Motors of the very expertise that had just saved the company from bankruptcy. Jackson's response demonstrated the grace that had sustained him through 20 years of systematic disrespect. I appreciate the offer, sir, but my roots run deep in New Orleans soil. This company gave me work when I needed it most, even if they didn't recognize what I could contribute. Sometimes loyalty means staying to help fix what's broken, not just the engines. His words carried the weight of moral authority that made several board members shift uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Jackson Baptiste had every right to abandon Magnolia Motors for better opportunities, yet he chose forgiveness over revenge, demonstrating character that exposed the poverty of Victoria's leadership by comparison. Dr. Weber nodded with understanding born from decades of witnessing technical genius balanced by human decency. Your grandfather taught you well, young man. Character and competence are equally important in building lasting success. Victoria found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own design. The live stream had captured every moment of her cruel mockery, her refusal to acknowledge Jackson's expertise, and her desperate attempts to dismiss his triumph as mere luck. Corporate recruiters from competing automotive companies were already reaching out through social media, offering Jackson positions that would triple his salary and provide the professional recognition he deserved. The security guard she had summoned to escort Jackson from the building now stood awkwardly near the exits, their presence transformed from intimidation into embarrassment. Tommy Williams, the security chief, who had known Jackson's grandfather, approached her with barely concealed disappointment. "Victoria," Williams said quietly, using her first name in a breach of protocol that signaled her diminished authority. "I've worked for this company for 40 years. Watched your daddy build it into something special. This ain't what he would have wanted. This ain't who you're supposed to be." His words carried the moral weight of generational memory, reminding Victoria that her family's legacy was built on treating workers with dignity rather than using them as entertainment for foreign investors. Her great-grandfather had started Magnolia Motors with the philosophy that good engines required good people, regardless of their educational pedigree or skin color. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Margaret Walsh approached her with a tablet displaying social media analytics that painted a picture of corporate disaster. The live stream had been shared thousands of times across LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Automotive industry professionals were discussing the video in forums and comment threads, praising Jackson's technical brilliance while condemning Victoria's leadership methods. The company's reputation metrics have dropped 30% in the past hour, Walsh reported with the detached professionalism of someone updating her resume. Human Resources is receiving calls from employment law firms, and several news organizations want interviews about workplace discrimination practices. Victoria Sterling Hayes stood alone in the boardroom that had once been her domain, watching her carefully constructed authority dissolve like sugar in Gulf Coast humidity. The engine that Jackson had repaired hummed quietly on the conference table, its mechanical contentment a stark contrast to the human wreckage surrounding it. The BMW delegation prepared for departure with polite efficiency that couldn't disguise their disappointment in American corporate culture. Klaus Mueller shook hands with Jackson one final time, his gesture carrying the respect of one professional recognizing another across cultural and linguistic boundaries. "The offer remains open," Mueller said quietly. "Talent like yours deserves recognition and proper compensation. Perhaps when American companies learn to value their own genius, the global marketplace will take notice." As the Germans filed out of the boardroom, their footsteps echoing like a funeral march, Victoria realized that her moment of cruel entertainment had cost far more than Jackson's dignity. It had exposed the moral bankruptcy of her leadership style and revealed the systematic waste of human resources that had crippled her company's ability to compete in global markets. The live stream counter had climbed past 150,000 viewers, transforming Jackson Baptiste from invisible maintenance worker to viral symbol of hidden talent overcoming systematic prejudice. Victoria Sterling Hayes had become something else entirely, a cautionary tale about the price of arrogance in an interconnected world where corporate behavior could no longer hide behind closed boardroom doors. The revelation that would change everything came not from the boardroom but from an unexpected source in the parking lot. As the BMW delegation prepared to depart, Dr. Weber's assistant approached him with urgent news that had emerged from their preliminary background research on Magnolia Motors' financial status. "Herr Doctor," she whispered in rapid German, "our Munich office has discovered irregularities in the company's financial reports. The pension fund shows suspicious activity, and there are discrepancies between public statements and actual cash flow." Dr. Weber's expression hardened as he processed the implications. German corporate culture demanded absolute transparency in business partnerships, and any hint of financial impropriety would terminate negotiations immediately. He turned back toward the building, his decision crystallizing with the precision of Bavarian engineering. Meanwhile, inside the boardroom, a different drama was unfolding. Margaret Walsh, the human resources director who had participated in mocking Jackson through company emails, received a phone call that drained the color from her face. Her assistant's voice trembled with barely controlled panic as she delivered news that would transform corporate humiliation into criminal investigation. "Ma'am, the FBI's corporate fraud division just called. They're opening an investigation into potential embezzlement and pension fund violations. Someone leaked our financial records to federal authorities, and they want to interview key executives tomorrow morning." Victoria Sterling Hayes felt the ground shift beneath her feet as the magnitude of her situation became clear. The engine crisis had been a symptom, not the disease. Magnolia Motors was hemorrhaging money through systematic mismanagement, and her desperate attempts to hide the losses had created a web of financial impropriety that federal investigators would unravel with methodical precision. The truth emerged in devastating waves. For 18 months, Victoria had been borrowing from the employee pension fund to cover operational expenses and research costs. The BMW contract represented her last chance to replace the missing money before auditors discovered the shortfalls. Jackson's success with the engine had saved the company's technical reputation, but it couldn't repair the financial damage caused by her desperate leadership. Board member Patricia Brooks confronted Victoria with documents that painted a picture of corporate malfeasance that made the engine problem seem trivial by comparison. 800 families depend on their pension security, Brooks said with quiet fury. You've gambled their retirement savings on engineering projects that you knew were failing. The security footage from the past year told an even more damning story. Cameras had captured Victoria's systematic campaign to marginalize Jackson, documenting her deliberate efforts to exclude qualified personnel from engineering discussions while expensive consultants failed repeatedly. The video evidence would provide prosecutors with a clear timeline of discriminatory practices that had cost the company millions in wasted resources. Jackson Baptiste stood in the center of this corporate hurricane with the calm dignity of someone who had weathered far worse storms. 20 years of systematic disrespect had prepared him for this moment, not through bitterness or desire for revenge, but through a deep understanding that character revealed itself most clearly under pressure. Dr. Weber returned to the boardroom with Klaus Mueller and their full delegation, their faces reflecting the gravity of information they had received from Munich. "We have discovered additional concerns about this partnership," Weber announced with Germanic directness. "Our due diligence reveals financial irregularities that preclude any business relationship under current management." The words fell like hammer blows on Victoria's remaining authority. The BMW contract that represented salvation for 800 families was evaporating because of her own desperate attempts to maintain control through deception and financial manipulation. Jackson's technical triumph had become meaningless if the company couldn't survive federal investigation. Klaus Mueller's next words carried the weight of industrial judgment that would reshape Magnolia Motors' future. "However, we remain interested in Mr. Baptiste's innovative methodologies. If he were to lead a restructured engineering division under new management, BMW would consider revised partnership terms." The offer hung in the air like smoke from a ceremonial pipe, carrying implications that made Victoria's hands shake with desperate recognition. Her own employees were being offered the position she had denied them, by investors who had lost faith in her leadership entirely. Margaret Walsh approached Victoria with a legal document that would define her immediate future. "The board has called an emergency session for 6 o'clock this evening. You're being asked to submit your resignation before federal investigators arrive tomorrow morning. The ultimatum reflected corporate politics at its most brutal. Resign voluntarily or face public termination, followed by criminal prosecution. Victoria's 20-year career was ending, not with recognition of her achievements, but with acknowledgement of systematic failures that had endangered the livelihoods of everyone who had trusted her leadership. Jackson watched this corporate collapse with the detached interest of someone observing a natural disaster from safe distance. Victoria had orchestrated his public humiliation, expecting easy victory, never anticipating that her victim possessed both the technical expertise to solve her problems and the moral character to offer forgiveness even after triumph. "Ma'am," Jackson said quietly, approaching Victoria with the same respect he had shown during 20 years of invisible service, "I want you to know that I don't take any pleasure in seeing you struggle. Good people sometimes make bad choices when they're scared. The question is whether they learn from those mistakes or let them define who they become." His words carried the weight of Christian forgiveness that had sustained him through decades of systematic disrespect. Victoria stared at him with growing realization that her supposed victim possessed a strength of character that exposed the poverty of her own moral foundation. "Doctor." Weber observed this interaction with professional fascination, recognizing leadership qualities that transcended educational credentials or corporate titles. "Mr. Baptiste," he said with formal respect, "BMW would be honored to discuss executive consulting opportunities. Your combination of technical expertise and personal integrity represents exactly the kind of partnership we seek in global markets." The offer represented vindication beyond Jackson's wildest dreams, recognition from one of the world's most respected automotive companies, financial security for his family, and professional acknowledgement of expertise that had been hidden for 2 decades. Yet his response demonstrated the character that had sustained him through years of systematic underestimation. "I appreciate the recognition, Dr. Weber, but my commitment remains with Magnolia Motors and the families who depend on this company's success." Sometimes the best way to fix what's broken is to stay and help rebuild it properly. Tommy Williams, the security chief who had known Jackson's grandfather, stepped forward with information that would complete the circle of revelation. "Dr. Weber, there's something else you should know about this young man. His grandfather, Eli Baptiste, served in Vietnam with the 1st Infantry Division, earned a Purple Heart fixing tank engines under enemy fire. That medal is what Jackson carries in his toolbox, reminder that expertise serves something bigger than personal recognition." The revelation added another layer to Jackson's character, connecting his mechanical genius to a legacy of service and sacrifice that resonated with Dr. Weber's own family history. German respect for military valor and technical competence created an immediate bond that transcended cultural differences. Victoria Sterling Hayes faced the wreckage of her career with growing understanding that her downfall had been authored by her own choices rather than external circumstances. The engine crisis had been solvable from the beginning. Jackson's expertise had been available for 20 years. Her systematic blindness to his capabilities had cost the company millions while endangering the livelihoods of 800 families who had trusted her leadership. The federal investigation would proceed regardless of her cooperation, but her response to Jackson's forgiveness would determine whether redemption remained possible. Corporate justice was being served through market forces and legal consequences, but personal transformation required acknowledgement of moral failures that went far deeper than financial impropriety. The boardroom that had witnessed Jackson's triumph now served as the setting for Victoria's choice: accept responsibility for systematic failures or continue the defensive postures that had led to this corporate disaster. The live stream continued broadcasting to a global audience that had become invested in this story of hidden talent overcoming institutional prejudice. But the final chapter would depend on whether those in power could learn from their failures or remain trapped by the arrogance that had created them. 6 months later, the morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Magnolia Motors' redesigned executive conference room, casting golden light across mahogany surfaces that had witnessed both corporate cruelty and ultimate redemption. Jackson Baptiste sat at the head of the table where Victoria's engine had once mocked 12 weeks of engineering failure, now wearing the title of Chief Engineering Officer with quiet dignity that spoke louder than any corporate pronouncement. The transformation of both man and company had become legendary throughout the automotive industry. Jackson's promotion had come with a salary that finally reflected his expertise, a figure that allowed him to move his ailing grandmother into the finest assisted living facility in New Orleans while establishing a college fund for neighborhood children who showed mechanical aptitude but lacked financial resources. Dr. Weber sat across from Jackson, reviewing partnership agreements that would make Magnolia Motors BMW's exclusive American hybrid engine supplier for the next decade. The German industrialist had flown from Munich specifically to finalize contracts that would employ over 1,200 workers and establish New Orleans as a major hub for sustainable automotive technology. The efficiency improvements you've implemented exceed our most optimistic projections, Dr. Weber said with Germanic satisfaction. Your harmonic optimization techniques are being studied by engineering teams across 3 continents. BMW's board has approved expanded research funding specifically to explore your methodologies. The success story extended far beyond technical achievements. Jackson's leadership style had revolutionized company culture, replacing fear-based management with collaborative problem-solving that honored every employee's potential contributions. The maintenance staff now participated in engineering discussions, their practical insights valued alongside advanced degrees and corporate credentials. Margaret Walsh, who had retained her position after extensive diversity training and public apology, presented quarterly reports that painted a picture of corporate renaissance. Employee satisfaction scores have reached historic highs, she announced with genuine pride. Turnover has dropped to nearly zero, and we're receiving applications from engineers across the country who want to work under Jackson's leadership. The morning's most significant agenda item involved Victoria Sterling Hayes, whose story had taken unexpected turns that demonstrated the possibility of authentic redemption. After resigning from Magnolia Motors and completing federal cooperation requirements, Victoria had spent 6 months in intensive therapy addressing the childhood trauma that had fueled her need to dominate others. Her father's abandonment when she failed to live up to his impossible standards had created wounds that festered into corporate cruelty. Understanding the root causes of her behavior didn't excuse the harm she had caused, but it provided a foundation for genuine change that surprised even her harshest critics. Victoria's requesting a meeting, Jackson said quietly, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had sustained him through 20 years of systematic disrespect. She's completed her rehabilitation program and wants to discuss making amends beyond the legal requirements. Board member Patricia Brooks, who had led the investigation into Victoria's financial misconduct, expressed skepticism that had been earned through experience. Apologies are easy when someone's facing prison time. How do we know this isn't just another manipulation? Jackson's response reflected the wisdom his grandfather had taught him about engines and human nature. Same way you tell if an engine's really fixed or just temporarily running smooth, you listen to its heart over time. Victoria's asking for a chance to prove her change is real, not just words meant to reduce her sentence. The meeting took place in the same boardroom where Victoria had orchestrated Jackson's public humiliation 6 months earlier. She entered wearing simple business attire instead of designer suits, her demeanor reflecting the humility that comes from confronting one's deepest failures. The woman who had once terrorized employees now moved with the careful grace of someone rebuilding trust, one interaction at a time. "Jackson," she said simply, her voice lacking the imperious tone that had once intimidated subordinates. "I've come to thank you for something I didn't understand at the time. When you could have destroyed me completely, you chose forgiveness instead. That grace gave me space to examine who I'd become and begin the work of becoming someone better." Her transformation went beyond personal therapy to concrete actions that demonstrated genuine remorse. Victoria had liquidated her personal assets to establish a scholarship fund for disadvantaged students pursuing engineering degrees. She had testified before Congress about workplace discrimination, using her own failures as evidence for stronger corporate accountability measures. "I can't undo the harm I caused," Victoria continued, her honesty cutting through years of corporate doublespeak. "But I can spend whatever time I have left trying to build systems that prevent other people from experiencing what you endured. If you'll have me, I'd like to work with your diversity initiatives, not as a leader, but as someone who understands how prejudice operates from the inside." Jackson studied her face with the same careful attention he had once given to broken engines, looking for signs of authentic change beneath surface appearances. 20 years of reading mechanical systems had taught him to distinguish between temporary fixes and permanent repairs, skills that applied equally well to human transformation. "Redemption isn't a destination," he said finally, his words carrying the weight of Christian forgiveness that had sustained him through decades of systematic disrespect. "It's a daily choice to be better than you were yesterday. If you're willing to do the work, there's always room for people who want to help fix what's broken." The partnership that emerged defied every expectation of corporate justice. Victoria became the company's Director of Inclusive Excellence, a position created specifically to address the systematic barriers that had hidden Jackson's talents for 2 decades. Her salary was modest, her authority limited, but her commitment to change proved authentic through months of consistent action. Together, they developed programs that identified and nurtured hidden talent throughout the organization. The Ely Baptiste Initiative, named for Jackson's grandfather, provided educational opportunities for employees whose potential had been overlooked due to racial, economic, or educational prejudices. Maintenance workers received engineering training, assembly line employees contributed to design discussions, and janitors were recognized as the systems experts they had always been. Dr. Weber observed these developments with professional fascination, recognizing leadership principles that transcended cultural boundaries. In Germany, we have a saying, "Der Charakter zeigt sich in der Krise." Character reveals itself in crisis. Both of you have demonstrated qualities that build lasting success far beyond technical competence. The transformation extended to Jackson's personal life as well. His grandmother, Ruby Baptiste, had recovered sufficiently to attend the company's annual recognition ceremony, where Jackson was honored not just for his engineering achievements, but for his leadership in creating inclusive excellence. At 87, Ruby carried the dignity of someone who had raised a grandson capable of forgiving his oppressors while demanding justice for future generations. "Your grandfather would be so proud," Ruby whispered as Jackson helped her to the podium where she would present the first Ely Baptiste Award to a young maintenance worker who had developed innovations in hydraulic efficiency. "He always said engines don't care about your color, just whether you listen to their hearts." You've taught this whole company how to listen. The ceremony's most powerful moment came when Victoria presented Jackson with a framed photograph, the same image Tommy Williams had shown Dr. Weber months earlier, featuring young Jackson standing beside his grandfather in 1995. She had located the original through painstaking research, had it professionally restored, and added an inscription that captured the essence of their unlikely partnership. "To Jackson Baptiste," the inscription read, whose grandfather's wisdom flows through his hands, whose character transcends every barrier, and whose forgiveness made redemption possible for someone who didn't deserve it. Thank you for teaching me that strength is found in lifting others up, not tearing them down. As the ceremony concluded, and employees returned to work shifts that now carried dignity and purpose, Jackson stood in his corner office overlooking the Mississippi River where his ancestors had labored as slaves, his grandfather had served as a mechanic, and he now led engineering innovations that would employ thousands of families for generations to come. The live stream that had captured his humiliation 6 months earlier had been viewed over 10 million times, becoming a viral symbol of hidden talent overcoming systematic prejudice. But Jackson's greatest satisfaction came not from viral fame or corporate recognition, but from the knowledge that 800 families could sleep peacefully, knowing their jobs were secure, their talents valued, and their futures bright. Dr. Weber's final assessment captured the essence of what Magnolia Motors had become under Jackson's leadership. This company has discovered something more valuable than efficient engines. It has learned to recognize the human potential that drives all innovation. That wisdom will sustain success long after any particular technology becomes obsolete. As evening settled over New Orleans and the last workers headed home to families who no longer worried about layoffs or discrimination, Jackson remained in his office listening to the subtle sounds of machinery finding its natural rhythm. The hybrid engines hummed with contentment, their harmonic frequencies perfectly balanced, their mechanical hearts beating in time with the human hearts that had learned to hear their voices. Still waters had run deep, just as his grandfather had promised. And in the deepest currents of forgiveness and redemption, both individuals and institutions had found the strength to rise above their broken histories and build something beautiful together. Dear friends, Jackson Baptiste's story reminds us that the most beautiful music often comes from the most unexpected instruments. At your age, you've witnessed decades of change, weathered storms that would break lesser spirits, and accumulated wisdom that no diploma can teach. Like Jackson's grandfather Eli, you understand that true strength isn't found in titles or corner offices, but in the quiet dignity of doing what's right, even when nobody's watching. This story speaks to the heart of what makes America great, not our buildings or bank accounts, but our capacity to recognize worth in every person, regardless of their station. You've seen friends and family members overlooked because of age, appearance, or circumstances beyond their control. Yet you also know that still waters run deep, and sometimes the most profound solutions come from those who've learned to listen with their hearts rather than just their heads. Jackson's triumph wasn't just about fixing an engine, it was about proving that character, kindness, and perseverance matter more than credentials. In your own life, you've probably been both the overlooked and the one doing the overlooking. The beautiful truth is that it's never too late for redemption, forgiveness, or second chances. Have you ever witnessed someone's hidden talents being overlooked due to prejudice or assumptions? What's the most valuable lesson life has taught you about judging people by their character rather than their appearance? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your wisdom could inspire someone who needs to hear it today.